Hi, everyone. Welcome to the We Shape podcast. I'm Katie. I'm here with Nina and Tyler.
Hi, everybody.
Another week, another podcast. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
I'm excited for this one.
This is going to be one of my favorite
ones.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to do the bio, or do you want to tee up a little context?
I'm going to tee up some context.
Yeah, I'd love to tee up some context too.
Okay. So our guest today is Chris Kresser. Tyler and I are going to have an argument over who's the biggest fan. and I'm gonna win. I was joking with Chris before this that this is legitimate. It's actually not a joke, but for the last 10 or 12 years, if any health question or anything has come up in my mind, I Google the question and then I put Chris Kresser and then I look for some article that he's researched and written. And most of the time, most of my topics are covered. So, but anyway, he is a wealth of knowledge, and we have a mutual friend.
Can I share the story?
Okay, sure.
They're already arguing over it.
Let's get a little space here. No, so we both were introduced to Chris a long time ago, 10, 12 years ago, in terms of just his podcast and his work he was doing within the kind of the paleo community and the ancestral health community at the time. And I took a lot of information from Chris, was always a big fan. He was such a wealth of knowledge around this stuff. And then, years had passed, and I had it was a little health issue thing that I was kind of trying to face. And I was like, I need to find somebody who's an amazing functional health doc. And we were talking to a mutual friend, Katie Wells, the wellness mama. And she's like, I can connect you with Chris. He does blood work and stuff for us. I was like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. So she connected us with Chris. And we actually started working with Chris at his private practice for, I think, a year or two, before he ended up closing the private practice and going full-time teaching practitioners. And then also, at one point in my life, I was recognizing how much my impulsivity and my brain and my craziness was just going wild. I was like, who is the most chill person I know? And I thought of Chris for some reason in that moment. I was like, he's just so mellow.
Chris is just the answer
he's
to
so mellow.
Questions.
Google is canceled?
Yeah.
And so I ping Chris, and I'm like, how are you so fucking chill, right?
Clearly he's so much chiller now, by the way.
Exactly. No, it is true. But anyways, so I was like, what, how would you go about learning how to practice mindfulness or Zen? And he connected with me, a guy named Forrest. And I'm so grateful for that, because Forrest has ended up being one of my close friends. And we ended up going to Forrest's birthday. So that's where we tee up maybe the conversation.
Oh, yeah. So we were at Forrest's birthday, and then Chris was there, and I was like, oh, hey, Chris, great to see you. We started talking about some health stuff, and then he was really sharing his kind of a newer lens that he was looking through in terms of wellness. And I was so fascinated, and I feel like there's a lot of alignment with some of the work that we're doing here. And so I don't want to banter anymore. I want to just introduce
that's all the time we got today for the podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
So let's get started. Nina's going to read his bio, and then we're just going to jump right in, because I feel like we're going to have such a meaningful conversation around maybe a different lens that we can look through in terms of wellness. So yeah, Nina, you want to
Absolutely.
tee us up?
So I'm super excited to have Chris with us as well. I am a new fan of his, so I'm learning from you guys.
You've
excited.
been
I know who he is, absolutely, but I'm not quite the Stan level that these guys are, but I'm ready to be in that place. All right, so we have Chris with us. He is a globally renowned expert, clinician, and educator in the fields of functional medicine and ancestral health, and the New York Times bestselling author of The Paleo Cure and Unconventional Medicine. He was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and fitness by Greatest.com, and has appeared as a featured guest on Dr. Oz, Time, The Atlantic, NPR, Fox and Friends, and other national media outlets. Chris recently launched Adapt Naturals, a supplement line designed to add back in what the modern world has crowded out and help people feel and perform their best. Chris co-founded and co-directed the California Center of Functional Medicine, one of the largest functional medicine clinics on the West Coast. Throughout his 15-year career, he has helped hundreds of patients reverse chronic diseases and recover their health and vitality. With that, welcome, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here.
We won't tell the listeners that you begged us to not read the bio.
He's like, please, no.
They're so boring sometimes.
It was a good one.
Well, let's get started, Chris. I think the reason I'm so interested in this conversation is to know somebody who has such a wealth of information around how to go about wellness in our diet, through nutrition, through exercise, through
biologically, right?
I mean, you're such a researcher, right? I love that you just get the facts. But when we were talking at that birthday party, I was just really curious about sort of a recent shift in perception. Not that you obviously have thrown your old understanding and knowledge out, but you've sort of, it sounded like to me like you had added in a new lens or another layer of perception. So I'm just curious if you can share, I don't know where you want to even start with that, but if we can just somehow start there.
Sure. Well, for me, it always starts with my own experience. I mean, that's how I got into this work in the first place. I had a really serious debilitating illness in my 20s as a result of a tropical illness that I contracted when I was traveling around the world and surfing in Indonesia. That's actually what led me into a career in functional medicine in the first place. I was not heading in that direction prior to getting sick, and every step that I've taken along my career path has just been born from my own experience. So this most recent evolution, I guess you could call it, just came from me reflecting on what has been most important on my own health journey, and then also what I've witnessed in being able to support hundreds of patients on their health journey, and also training now over 2,000 healthcare practitioners, doctors, nurse practitioners, health coaches, variety of different backgrounds, and hearing their stories of what's been important in their practices and what they've learned in guiding and supporting patients. And the gist is, we all know that a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, spending time outdoors, all of these things are important to our health and well-being. But there's more to it than that, right? What I started to notice is that I had patients who were doing a lot of those things well, but they were still unhappy. They still didn't look at their life and feel like it was where they wanted it to be, and they didn't feel like they were healthy, if we use a broader definition of that term. And then when I looked at my own experience, I also realized that there were many times in my life where I had still symptoms. My physical health may not have been exactly where I wanted it to be, but I felt like I was thriving. And in our culture, we tend to define health as merely the absence of symptoms or disease. And what I'm trying to do is shift that definition to something broader. I don't have actually yet a perfect definition in one line, but I think one of the definitions I've heard that comes the closest is from Moshe Feldenkrais, who's the founder of the Feldenkrais method. Some people are familiar with that. He defined health as the ability to live your dreams. So that's a really much broader and more inclusive definition, because it could include someone who maybe isn't 100% symptom free. Maybe they still have some issues that bother them. Maybe they have an autoimmune condition that's never going to fully go away, and they always have to be a little bit careful. And they will sometimes have flare ups, if stress gets the better of them, or, they're traveling or something like that. But they're thriving. They love their work. They're doing meaningful work. They have a great family life. They have great relationships. They're contributing to their community. They have fun. They play music or have a hobby that they really love. They have an incredible, rich, meaningful life. I would call that person healthy. They are living their dreams. They're living a life that is, by any way of measuring it, is a great life. And yet, they may have some physical symptoms or even mental symptoms that are occasionally challenging or difficult. And in fact, if you look at people who are very accomplished in any field, whether it's, music, actors, high-performing athletes, entrepreneurs, and whether we're talking about contemporary people in our time, or people historically, famous scientists, notable figures that we've all heard of. When I studied the lives of these people, I read a lot of biographies, and it's kind of one of my ways of learning. Almost without exception, these folks had some significant challenge in their life, whether it was a mental health challenge or a physical health challenge. And I came to understand that they were successful not despite of that challenge, but almost because of it.
Wow.
And so it started to occur to me that maybe we're not thinking about health in the right way, and maybe our current myopic obsession with becoming symptom free and assuming that we can be happy, we'll finally arrive at the life we want once we get rid of all of our symptoms is not really the best way to look at it.
So what I hear you saying is this idea that like maybe our culture has presented, quote unquote, someone being healthy as like a checklist. Because that's how I started to feel. Like if you just check all these boxes, everything will be great. And we're really missing like a huge component, maybe energetically, around someone's like attitude about that. And so I think a lot about sometimes I talk about my my dad on this podcast because he's such a, I don't know how to describe Pops, but he's just
Grounded.
He just has the ability to have a really amazing attitude regardless of what's going on around him.
Okay, so like a quick example is at a funeral we went to. Pops walks up to the casket and goes, "What a gorgeous casket! Look at all this fine woodwork right here. Isn't that wonderful?"
And I started, and he doesn't, and I started to realize throughout my life as certain circumstances would pop up, I often would ask myself, like, what would Pops's perception of this situation be? Because there's infinite ways that we can hold energy around various things, but what is the way that's actually going to serve us? And so what I hear you saying is that we've maybe missed this component, and that health is not a checklist, and that you've watched people do everything you've told them to do and still not end up thriving in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are a few corollaries to that I think are really important that often get left out of the conversation. One is that I've come to understand health as an ecosystem rather than just an individual endeavor. And there's so many examples of this, but let's consider someone who grew up in the inner city and didn't have access to healthy food, was surrounded by air and water pollution. If that person ends up developing a chronic disease, is that something that's fully in that person's control? Of course not. They are shaped by their ecosystems, some of which they had control over, but a lot of which in that case they didn't have control over. They didn't have a choice. And many people today still don't have as much choice as they would like over the factors that influence their health. In the research literature, these are referred to as the social determinants of health. So there are things like the environment that we live in, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the social factors like levels of stress, poverty, all of that. And it's really kind of it's a narrow viewpoint to assume that the individual choices we make are the only things that impact our health. That's just simply and objectively false. And it becomes more false for people who are disadvantaged, economically or socioeconomically. So that's one thing that's worth pointing out. Another, on a slightly different track, is that we've learned over the past, there's been a revolution in the understanding of neuroscience in the past 30 to 40 years. And one of the concepts that has really shifted the way I think about health is called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the understanding that changes in our thoughts, behavior, and our emotions actually change the structure and function of our brain. So when people are first exposed to this, it can sound pretty woo-woo. It can sound like, oh, okay, I'm just creating my reality all the time with my thoughts. And I think people have understandably an aversion to that. But we're talking about hardcore neuroscience right now. These changes, when I say structural and functional changes in the brain, I mean changes that can be measured with an MRI or brain scan. Like these are objective changes that can really be measured in the brain. And what we know now, and there's a saying from this world of neuroscience, neurons that fire together wire together. So what this means is that if you have any kind of habitual pattern of thought or behavior or emotion, the neurons that are associated with that pattern will get fired repeatedly, right? The more those neurons get fired, the stronger the connections between them become, and the bigger actually those neural pathways become, and that can be imaged with a brain scan. So an analogy I like to use is like a road system. These habitual patterns of thought and behavior become superhighways. So it's way more likely that a nerve impulse is going to travel down that massive superhighway, whereas the less common or not non-habitual patterns of thought and behavior become like the side roads or even the dirt roads. And those are just going to be less traveled, and they're likely to be less traveled because of that. So it's a good news, bad news situation, because it means that once those habitual patterns are in place, they're far more likely to be perpetuated. And that's what explains how we get stuck in ruts. The flip side and the good news is that countless studies have shown that we can rewire the brain. And by shifting those patterns of thoughts and behavior, we can actually turn those dirt roads or side roads into bigger and bigger highways over time. And that's a core realization from neuroplasticity. And where this relates to, how this relates to what we've been talking about so far, is that your patterns of behaving and responding to the world around you tell your brain what it should get good at doing. So if you spend all your time being sick or thinking about being sick and practicing being sick, you will actually train your brain to be very good at being sick. And I want to be clear here. I'm not suggesting that sickness is all in our head. There's not a physical reality to it. I'm not suggesting that when we're sick, it's our fault. Believe me, I've had that experience of being very sick for a very long time. And I know what it feels like to be told that it's my fault. It's our fault. That's not what I'm saying here. But I am saying that if you took two people, for example, and they both had the same illness, and one person, spent a little bit of time attending to their illness, like whatever time felt like it was necessary, but then spends the rest of their time doing work that they love, volunteering, spending time with their kids, having fun, living a great life, that's going to establish certain neural pathways in their brain that will become enhanced over time. Whereas if the other person spends all of their time researching and reading about their, what they're going to do about their illness, the next treatment, going to the next doctor, taking the next supplement, doing, really kind of assuming the identity and allowing that pursuit to take over their whole life, then those are the neural pathways that are going to be fired. And that's going to have an outsized impact on their life experience and the way they experience themselves on a moment to moment basis. So that was like a huge mind and altering realization for me, both as someone who had experienced chronic illness myself and had actually learned to deal with it in this way without really understanding neuroplasticity at that point, and then as someone who supported hundreds of people through this process as well.
But, I would love that you say this because, we take this concept and we roll it into self-image a lot within WeShape. And, a simple habit that I feel like most people aren't even aware of is you walk past the mirror and you look at yourself and you go, look at that, this, and look at that. You start judging and criticizing yourself. And, one of the things that we try to start building awareness around is first have awareness that you're doing that. Second, try to start replacing it with something new and building that new neural pathway so the old one can start fading away. Like look at yourself in the mirror and think of one thing that you appreciate about yourself. Even if that thing is, hey, I woke up this morning and my body breathed all night without me having to think about it, right? And I think that's such a powerful thing to start bringing awareness to, that you don't have to be stuck in these ruts, but it does take time. It does take repetition. in order to create these new, stronger neural pathways that will support you rather than keep you stuck feeling, whatever it is that you're struggling with. So I've heard you mention a lot of things so far in this podcast about family and friendships and things that bring you joy in your work and stuff like that. But I'm curious if you could expand on any of the things that you might have discovered have, really meaningful impact on people's experience in their lives that brings them to more closer to themselves and brings them more joy and happiness.
And before he does that, I want to make sure I'm really digesting this concept. What I think I hear you saying is that whether we know it or not, we're attaching to various identities. And we're using our energy in different ways, whether we want to be mindful of it or whether we're just going to do it because we're habitually doing it. And I think what you're saying is that's happening no matter what. And we have an opportunity to understand that that's happening and to take one step closer to more mindfulness around that in order to potentially have a shift in these neuropathways.
Hey there, if you're enjoying the WeShape podcast and you've heard us talk about WeShape before, then you're probably thinking to yourself, hey, what is WeShape? Well, at WeShape, we create personalized at-home workouts for every single one of our members. These are workouts where every single movement is customized to you to help you connect with your body and care for your body in a much more meaningful way. We also have a community of people there to support you, to help uplift you as you examine your beliefs, set new intentions, and again, start showing up for yourself as an act of self-care rather than trying to do your workouts as an act of self-judgment. And hey, if you're a fan of the podcast, we also do a live podcast discussion group on Zoom, as well as other Q&As, as well as free challenges for all of our members to help you get motivated to actually start taking action to caring for yourself so you can feel better in your body and about your body. So if you want to try WeShape for free for 2 full weeks, go to WeShape.com/podcast and you can get started today.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. There's a saying, one of my teachers, Sherry Huber, used to say that I really like and I think is applicable here, which is the quality of our experience is determined by the focus of our attention. The quality of our experience is determined by the focus of our attention. So if my attention as someone who's struggling with a chronic illness is always on the illness, what I'm going to do about it, how I'm going to respond to it, oh, why is this happening to me? All my thoughts and attention are going towards that. Then that determines the quality of my experience will be largely defined by that. If, on the other hand, I'm able to shift the focus of my attention to other things that bring meaning and joy and fulfillment into my life, like getting back to your question, Tyler, like I'm spending time with my daughter and my dogs, even, just the joy that brings, and going outside for making a mountain bike ride. Even if I don't feel very well that day, I could take a shorter ride or an easier ride, or I could even just go for a walk around the block and feel the sun against my skin and really pay attention to the sensations that I'm experiencing on that walk. It's sometimes called that a sensory walk. I had times when I was so sick that that's all I could do was walk around the block. But when I did, I would make sure to pay as much attention as I could to all of the sensations that I had. Like maybe my gut was in incredible pain, but was there another part of my body that was not in pain? Like even just the tips of my fingers or my hands, or could I feel the sun against my forehead? Could I hear the sound of the wind in the trees? Could I hear the sound of kids playing? Like just shifting the focus away from the experience of pain and to the experience of pleasure and joy. As Sherry Huber's, as that quote suggests, that shift in focus is something we always have a choice about. We may not have a choice about what's happening in our body in terms of pain or even mental, thoughts and emotions that are happening, but we can direct our attention toward things that bring us more joy and fulfillment. So, this will differ for everybody. I think there are some universal human experiences that most of us share. So, spending time with loved ones, friends, family members, pets is meaningful and rewarding for most people. For spending time outside in nature There's, of course, a lot of, everyone has had their own subjective experience of well-being related to that, but there's tons of research too that suggests that just even walking barefoot on the grass can have a profound impact on our well-being because it connects us with our deep human roots. That's biologically hardwired into our DNA. Listening to music, particularly music that is uplifting, is important. Touch, any other experience that brings pleasure, even just taking a hot bath, going in the sauna, feeling warm and comfortable, getting a massage, lying down and doing some deep relaxation, a simple yoga practice, like cooking, pursuing hobbies, playing music, like all the specific variations will differ, but the key thing is spending time each day where you intentionally and purposefully shift your attention to things that bring you joy. And I used to actually write prescriptions for that to patients in my clinic, because I feel like that's more important in many cases than even supplements or diet changes or medication. Like, actually, here's your joy prescription. And what I would have people do is make a list of all the things that bring them joy that they're aware of, and just put that on the fridge, put it in their bathroom, on the mirror, put it in different places, and then just choose 2 or 3 things from that list each day. And these don't have to be huge things. And in fact, they probably shouldn't be. They should be just simple things like taking a walk around the block, or, doing 5 minutes of foot massage with your partner, or, something that is achievable, even within the context of your busy daily life. And when you gain the experience of doing that and the benefit that comes from that, you create an upward spiral. I like, we hear a lot about downward spiral. You create an upward spiral where you're actually more likely then to do these things over time, because you get the benefit of doing them on a smaller scale. And then you just gradually build a life where these things are habitual.
And I love the simple idea of, like, write down 10 things that bring you joy and just do a couple a day.
Can we have everybody write that prescription for themselves right now? Go ahead and email your list, right? Email your list to podcast@weshape.com. We want to see who's going to jump in and write themselves a list of this and get started. So,
I mean, I think also one of my mentors had told me, sort of like, where your attention goes is where the energy flows, right? So it's like that idea of just, what are you going to spend your time on? You're going to attach to something probably no matter what. So what is it going to be? And what I hear you saying is, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it can be something really simple. And the more we put attention on those things, the more that energy is going to come. And it also reminds me, and I think I told you about this when we were at the birthday party, when our daughter got diagnosed with Lyme disease, I had a moment of saying, how will you communicate this with her? Because the last thing I want to do is take this small child's mind and have her attached to the identity of this disease. And I told her, we have discovered that there's a Lyme virus in your body. And we're working with great people, and you're an incredible healer yourself, Ellie. And so this is probably just going to be something that we treat for a little while, and then we're just actually asking it to leave, and it's going to go. And I just never really wanted her to attach to, I'm Ellie and I have Lyme disease. Because regardless if it stayed with her or it didn't, that identity I knew was not going to serve her. And we were able to have the Lyme go dormant, and we also had and I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody, and I have no scientific data to prove that my psychological philosophy and interacting with her was like what made that happen. But I knew that regardless, I didn't want her to feel like that was who she was. And I think what you're saying is, like, we all have a choice to decide the things that we attach to, and that suffering is inevitable as a human being. And unfortunately, like, it's the question for me that is always like, just why do some people have to suffer more than others, right? Like, why isn't life fair? Like, some of these, why does this person have this disease and I don't, and like that person doesn't? Like, I don't know that we'll really ever be able to answer those questions, but what I hear you saying is that we all have an opportunity to have an attitude that shapes our experience of that suffering.
Absolutely. So yeah, I just want to follow up a couple of things on that. That's one is I know that it's easy when I imagine when some people are listening to this to have the one response might be, oh, so you're just telling us to ignore, our symptoms, not pay any attention, and just sort of like positive think our way out of this. That's I just want to be really clear that that's not what I'm saying. I don't think it's what any of you are saying.
Oh no, we dealt with the Lyme disease symptoms for 2 years. There was no discarding that was a real experience, right?
Exactly.
I'm happy you're saying this, Chris, because what I was going to say right there before you started talking was, I have had this awareness around, what's the difference between an attitude of gratitude and kind of suppressing your feelings or needs or whatever you're actually experiencing in that moment and not showing up for yourself. Because I think people think of it as like, oh, everything's fine. I'll just think my happy thoughts and like my situation will go away. But that's not necessarily the truth. So anyways, I'll pass the mic back to you. I'm just happy that you're touching on this point.
Yeah, it's such an important one. And it's an area where I've myself have gotten really hung up, occasionally over the years, and where I see a lot of people getting hung up. And one way I think about it is the difference between acceptance and submission. So those words are often used interchangeably, but I think they couldn't be more different. So acceptance is just the recognition of what is. All I'm doing when I accept something is I'm just recognizing the truth. So in using a personal example, let's say I have gut pain in a given moment. I recognize that I have it. I accept that I have it. Submission is giving up. Submission is, I see that this is happening and I can never do anything. It will never change. I can never do anything about it. And then, so I'm just submitting to this. Those are really different concepts. And I think what happens, it's inevitable when someone hears a conversation like this, they think, oh, you're just saying I should just submit to my illness and give up on trying to do anything about it and make myself better in the future. Absolutely not. I'm, as a functional medicine clinician, someone who specializes in helping people deal with these things and who's been through my own illness, I'm 100% committed to finding, to getting to a place where I feel as healthy as I possibly can. What I'm saying here is that acceptance is required to make progress, in my opinion. It's not submission, but you cannot take appropriate action and make progress without accepting what is true in the first place. And where I see a lot of people get stuck is just a lot of struggle. And, you were saying, Katie, it was like, why is this happening to me? Why am I the one that has to deal with this versus other people? That's a lack of acceptance. That's a not being willing to accept the reality for what it is. And that can stand in the way. Once I accept what is really happening, then it's up to me how I'm going to deal with that. And I actually, with my patients and in my own experience, I've used this analogy of zooming in and zooming out, like photography, right? So there were times in my journey where I really needed and wanted and had the energy for diving into like strict diet, taking a new supplement routine, a new treatment protocol, the like a lot of focus on addressing the symptoms and trying to get to the root cause of the problem and resolve that. And that's totally appropriate. But if all of my time is spent zoomed in that way, I'm going to lose the bigger perspective that you get when you zoom out. And what I found was that I had to alternate periods of zooming in and zooming out meaning like I'm going to actually soften my focus on all of those things. And I'm going to maybe start attending to other things like more time with my family, or, picking up a new hobby or my work, or other things that brought me joy and fulfillment. And that dance, like learning how to do that zoom in and zoom out, I think is really crucial, not just for people with chronic illness, but for anyone who's dealing with any difficult situation in their life. And last thing I'll say, Katie, is I'm really glad you brought kids into this, because kids are maybe the best example of how we naturally deal with an issue without any kind of identification or story or belief around it. Most kids don't have that. Like if they get sick, they don't have a whole story around that. Unless the parent has.
Isn't it messed up? I was going to say, when you start seeing your stories go into them and you're like, oh no, what have I done?
I was going to say, they don't unless we've given one to them, but they're just dealing with it, the pure experience of it, which is often, and I've seen, because I've worked with a lot of kids, kids are easier patients than adults.
Oh, yeah.
Often because of that. They don't have the identification, they don't have the story around it, and they're busy doing other fun stuff in their life and not thinking about it all the time. So it's a really great example that you brought up.
Yeah, I like this idea of kind of the zooming in and zooming out, because I think it does get really easy to zoom in. And I saw this TikTok like a couple months ago. I like to go on TikTok University a couple times a week. And there was like this image of like planet Earth and then like them zooming out, and you just like couldn't even see it at all. And I was like,
yeah.
The idea that human beings are so significant and so insignificant all at the same time is always like extremely fascinating to me.
You're a speck of dust on this planet.
So like,
yet this is your whole world, right?
And so like, I think sometimes when we are in a space of like suffering, maybe that is our first indication that is an opportunity to zoom out. Like that's the clue, right? Like I am stuck in something. Oh, I'm stuck in. I'm zoomed in. And so I wonder if that's our first clue. And like, even on a business level, like, having a startup company, I tell people one of the hardest things about being in the space that we are right now is that we have to be individual contributors, so zooming all the way in. And then we also have to hold the vision and the strategy for the business and zoom out. And that back and forth is a dance, and it takes practice, and it takes time, and it takes trust, and it takes a lot of things. But I think it can be applied to what you're saying as well. It's like if we've spent our whole life zoomed in, then it's going to take time and practice. So I want to encourage people that we're not just going to like develop this skill overnight. What you're talking about is a muscle, a pathway in the brain that has to be practiced, that has to be worked, but it's always an option.
Can I take a counter argument to that too? So, I hear you saying that people, submit and they get stuck. And I hear, Katie, you saying like people get stuck in the unfairness and whatnot. And we're talking about zooming in to, what your experience is, and then having the capacity to zoom out. And I don't want this to be misconstrued as an argument to not be able to do that. I think that's very important. But I think that a lot of people get stuck not zooming in enough sometimes to their experience as well. I think that people are afraid to experience their feelings around their situations. And, when I've processed this a lot inside myself and meditated on it, what I come to, at least in my own world, is, when we actually zoom in enough, we can find things that we can touch on. And for me, it starts with like, maybe it's anger or rage or unfairness or something, this emotion like that. And if we actually zoom in on that enough and let it go, then all of a sudden we can feel sadness, and we can get through that sadness, and we start to feel something different. And then the sadness melts away, and then we get to acceptance. Oh, interesting. Now we can get to acceptance. Like, this is what it is. And then underneath acceptance is compassion for self. And then underneath that, you're like, wow, I can actually experience joy again. And then you can focus on a new problem and it starts all over again.
So do you think that you can't zoom out and hold space for your emotion at the same time?
I think that sounds like a black belt practice to me. Sounds like a practice that you need to have a lot of time and experience on. I think I'm just trying to bring awareness to the reality that I feel like a lot of people are kind of afraid to zoom in enough to process an experience that they're having all the way fully.
Well, let's make a distinction and let me maybe just clarify what I mean by zooming in and zooming out.
Sure.
It's slightly different, I think. What I'm referring to more in that analogy is where our attention is going related to how we're dealing with a problem or a challenge in our life, on a sort of practical level of like how we're approaching it. So like, let's say I have a chronic illness. I'll just use my own history as an example. So there was a period, early in my chronic illness where I was seeing lots of doctors, I was trying lots of special diets, I was doing lots of different treatment protocols, and that felt totally appropriate. It was where I was at. I had just gotten sick, and I was trying to figure out what was going on and trying and get to the bottom of it and do something about it. But after a few years of doing that, with not, having some results, some positive results, but not what I wanted, it became clear to me that just, that definition of insanity, right? Like just doing more of the same is maybe not going to lead to the outcome that I would like. And so I actually purposely, this is when I moved to Esalen and met Forrest, by the way, a mutual friend, because, and for those who aren't familiar with Esalen, it's a retreat center in Big Sur where there's a lot of emotional and psycho-spiritual kind of workshops and work offered there. And I lived there for 2.5 years. I worked there. And my purpose in doing that was, hey, I've tried this zoomed in approach of like, doing all these treatment protocols and seeing doctors and all of that. And it hasn't really created the results that I've wanted. So I'm going to zoom out and like bring in some broader perspectives here.
What else is there?
What else is there? Like, what happens if I just turn my attention away from my physical illness, like the symptoms of the illness, and really trying to like get rid of those and just like learn something new, and like do like meet a lot of new people and live in this beautiful place and spend a lot of time outside in nature and just like relax the goal orientation and shift it to something else. But I would say, Tyler, that my intention, whether zoomed in or zoomed out, I think for me, at least, the way I understand it, has nothing to do with my willingness to experience my feelings and really welcome any felt experience that I'm having. Like, I feel like that's crucial at any level of Zoom, if you will. Whether we have a macro lens or a super wide angle, it's always important and even essential to be able to experience my emotions fully, because that's actually what determines the whole experience of in my moment to moment life.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for clarifying the zoom in versus zoom out so that we can be speaking the same language there.
Yeah, let me give you like a very specific real world example.
Yes,
I
please.
think this can be helpful. So let's say, so a couple nights ago, I had some gut pain, and this is like my history was a digestive kind of illness. So like when I have symptoms still, it tends to be gut related. So I have that pain. The first thing I do is, of course, notice that I'm feeling that pain. And then inevitably there'll be some feelings or sensations or emotions related to that pain. So it could be fear. Oh my gosh, am I going to, is this starting again? And then thoughts related to that pain, like, which, that is this going to happen again? That's a story. That's a belief. That's a thought pattern that can be pretty habitual. That's related to fear. But I have a choice in that moment, or lots of choices I could make. So one is I could like get on the internet and start doing some research, like what's going on here. Another, I could think about what I ate. Was it something I ate? Was it something I did? I could think about, what should I do? Should I take a supplement? Should I do something? Nothing is wrong with any of that, right? Or another choice could be that I would lie down on the floor and just put my hand on my belly and do some breathing and and some just relaxation, and even send love to my belly, just putting my hand on my belly. Or I could suggest to my daughter that we go and take a walk or take a bike ride. Or I could go sit with my dog and rub my dog's chest. Like there's all of those are totally appropriate responses, but they will all lead to a different experience, right? And so I'm not saying that any of those choices are right or wrong. They all might be appropriate given where you are, where I am on my zoom in, zoom out continuum. But if the choice is always to go into, oh my God, is this happening again? What does it mean? Did I eat the wrong thing? I'm going to get on the internet and see what diet I could do that's going to make this better. Like, if that's always the response, that's when I see problems in myself and with my patients. And I think for a lot of people, that is always, or at least often, the response.
I mean, it reminds me of what Nina says a lot.
What does she say a lot?
Which is, I want to be really clear about this because I think it can be misinterpreted, but feelings aren't facts. Not to be confused with feelings aren't valid.
Right.
So feelings aren't facts when you say that. What I take from that is that doesn't have to drive a decision. And I think that's what you're saying. It's like you can have the feelings. Those are valid experiences, but it doesn't have to drive the behavior.
I have a personal
And I would
experience.
say thoughts are also not facts.
Yeah. Well, that's man.
Lead into is like I have a personal experience with a friend who gives me a lot of wonderful advice, and I used to be like a health focused, like I have to research all the time, and I still do that sometimes. I definitely still reach for that.
Say
Zoom
Dr.
in
Google is your best friend.
But she asked me one time when I was kind of living in this fear and anxiety around something that was happening. She was like, "Are you feeding the wildfire in your mind?" And I was like, oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Like this behavior
lit everywhere.
This behavior is feeding the wildfire in my mind, which is feeding more of this behavior, which is then, it's like, again, we want to go on an upward spiral, not a downward spiral. And when she gave me that piece of information around, like, does this behavior serve like the outcome you're hoping for? I was like, no, it's absolutely building anxiety. It's creating more distress. And I kind of had to have a zoom out, like you were saying, around acceptance of something. To me, it doesn't mean you have to like it. It just means that it is. And I think for a long time, I was in this headspace of if I have to accept something, then I have to be like super cool with it. Like, great, this is so wonderful that this is happening. And that's not the case with acceptance. And again, like zooming out of the wildfire in your brain, like, does this activity help you feel at ease, at rest? Like, I don't know. For me, Googling my symptoms definitely does not help with that.
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, that is kind of a great filter or way of determining what is the best action for you in that moment. Will this lead to a greater sense of well-being? Sometimes the answer might be yes for doing some research, because maybe it's been a while since you did that, or maybe you're just feeling really like you need help and support. So like doing some research to find a doctor or someone to work with actually will lead to a greater sense of confidence and well-being. But as you pointed out, often it doesn't. Often it's fueling the wildfire of the mind. And the saying in Buddhist system is the monkey mind, which is also a great analogy. Think of a monkey just like running around in our head, just like
throwing things
and throwing stuff around. And But, I mean, that's basically what our minds are often like, right? And we can objectively see that if we put it that way, that it's preposterous for us to like feel like we have to believe all of those crazy thoughts and ideas, and that kind of frantic energy is not serving us. But when we're stuck in that experience, it can be more difficult, to have that separation and see that clearly. So I love that filter of just what's going to bring me more joy and peace in this moment. And that's your decision for where you choose to put your attention from there.
Well, I know we're coming up on time, but I just want to say that I feel like this episode is going to be so valuable to our listeners, Chris, because a lot of people in our community are coming from that background of like, do the checklist, meet the number on the scale, do this thing. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head when it's like, wait a minute, we forgot a really, really important factor of like being a human being. So I just want to thank you so much for your perspective and for your time. I have so much gratitude for you being willing to come and share your message with our listeners.
Yeah, likewise.
I love what we have. A new measurement for health.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, what I'm excited about is just helping people to create more space in their life for joy and the just incredibly rich experience of being a human, no matter where you're starting from. Like whether you feel great and are 100% happy with your health and where you're at, or whether you are really like in the depths of struggling with a serious chronic disease, or whether you're not happy with your weight, the message here is like it's in our power to experience joy and well-being no matter where we're at on that continuum. And that's something that we have a choice about no matter what else is going on. That's like the best news ever for me.
It's the best news ever.
I feel hugely relieved.
Yeah,
Like this
yeah.
huge weight has been lifted.
Yeah, it is the best news ever. Well, thank you again, Chris. Where can people find you?
ChrisKresser.com is where a lot of articles, ebooks, my podcasts, all that stuff lives. And then adaptnaturals.com is the supplement line. So those are like, that's joy in a capsule.
Sign me up.
And remember, if you guys are actually struggling with anything health related, you go to Dr. Google and type in Chris Kresser after your question. And that way it works pretty
served
good.
me well. Well, thanks again, Chris. We'll connect soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you all.